What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all doing well, and thanks so much for clicking here on another video where we're going to be talking about the 5th installment into the John Wick universe, and that film is called Ballerina. Directed by Wiseman, this film stars people like Ana de Armas, Keanu Reeves, Ian McShane, Anjelica Huston, Lance Reddick, and many more. And before we get too far into this video, if you guys are a fan of early reviews like this, as well as up-to-date reviews, live streams, retrospective reviews, and the occasional vlog, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing. But if you're a returning viewer, thanks so much for stopping by once again. I really appreciate it. And consider hitting that like button and commenting down below because it helps the channel out. And as I already mentioned, we're going to be talking about the new installment into the John Wick franchise, which if you look online, they changed the title from just simply Ballerina to From the World of John Wick Ballerina. Literally, I've seen this now everywhere on Google, IMDb. If I go to the AMC app to purchase tickets for this, it's on there as well. Very strange choice. I guess they just didn't trust that the marketing sold enough with the posters and the trailer that John Wick is in this universe. But yeah, strange choice. But I'm just going to call it Ballerina moving forward. But when I heard this one was coming out, there was a little bit of like, do we need this? I'll be honest. And even after having seen the film, there's a little bit of, did we need this? But, you know, I was looking forward to it. The John Wick franchise has been something that, for the most part, has been really solid for me. I've loved the action. I've loved the very straightforward, simplistic storytelling that's also able to kind of expand on the world around itself with each and every installment. The character of John Wick has become a huge iconic character in the world of film in modern day. I think that at this point, moving down the line, I totally see how 15, 20 years from now, John Wick will be just one of those household names when it comes down to movie characters. And Keanu Reeves had this huge resurgence with these films. So I was incredibly excited to see more in this universe, despite not necessarily feeling like we needed after the 4th film. This film takes place in between the events of Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, which also piqued my interest. But one thing that did have me a little worried is the fact that this film is not directed by Chad Stahelski, who did the first 4 John Wick films. This time around, this film is directed by Wiseman, who is a director that has a bit of a checkered history with film in terms of the reception it's gotten from critics and audiences. I am a fan of certain films he's done, though, like the first 2 Underworld films, so I went into it fairly excited, just looking forward for a good action movie. So before we get into my thoughts on the film, let's get into what this film is all about. Set between the event of John Wick Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, Ballerina follows Eve Macaro, a ballerina assassin trained by the Ruskaroma organization. After the murder of her father, Eve embarks on a quest for vengeance, navigating the perilous world of assassins and confronting figures from the High Table and the Continental. Her journey intertwines her with the one and only John Wick, offering a deeper exploration of the John Wick universe. So immediately, it goes without saying that this is a film that very much relies on the fact that, you know, this is in the John Wick universe. Everything about the way that the synopsis reads, the title they changed it to, the posters, and the trailers, they definitely want to pull you in, not only on the fact that this is an Ana de Armas, you know, action movie that is in the world of John Wick, but just really wants you to know, hey, John Wick, John Wick, John Wick. And look, I'm a huge fan of John Wick, but I almost feel like this movie should have been able to stand on its own without John Wick. Now, if you've seen the trailer, you know John Wick is in it. If you've seen the posters they've released for this, you know John Wick is in it. And I'll just go ahead and start this off by saying that Keanu Reeves is great once again as John Wick in the time that we get to see him in this film. He is used fairly sparingly, so if you're going into this expecting a whole lot of John Wick, I will say tame those expectations. But I do think the time they utilize him is really well done. I think Keanu Reeves is great in this role, and he continues to showcase why he's such an iconic character and why people love Keanu Reeves. Now, when it comes down to the main star of this film, Ana de Armas, I've really enjoyed her as an actress. I think she's been able to showcase a lot of different kinds of roles over the course of the last decade or so, whether it be something a little bit more comedic or something that's a little bit more dramatic, or in the case of this, something a little bit more action oriented. She's been able to do a lot of different things. She's been in a lot of different films of a lot of different genres and has definitely showcased a lot of acting ability across the board. And so when I saw that she was going to be in this film, it was going to be essentially in a, you know, female John Wick-esque movie, you know, I was hoping that she'd be up to the task because I think the bar was set so high with those John Wick films. And what I can start this off by saying is that while I don't think that this film has the same sense of atmosphere and the exact same approach to capturing the top tier action that's in the John Wick films, I do think for the most part, Wiseman does a great job of very much borrowing the style of John Wick, giving us a very fun, over-the-top action film here that has some great hand-to-hand combat, choreography, gunplay, and some big spectacle. If you're going into this hoping for some good action that you can kind of just shovel some popcorn down your gullet and just watch something go boom and a bunch of shots go off and a bunch of badass hand-to-hand combat, then I don't think you're going to be disappointed with Ballerina. I think there's plenty of that here on display, and I think that Ana de Armas just showcases why she's a good actress once again. And outside of the very over-the-top action, of course, a lot of people love the John Wick franchise for its look. It's very Hong Kong inspired, neon lights, and very colorful approach to telling these stories. And while I don't think this necessarily, again, fully borrows the aesthetic of John Wick, I do think it has plenty of moments that very much want you to know, hey, this is in that world. A lot of purples, a lot of bright reds and oranges and yellows, and a lot of colors to kind of give this its own identity while also still playing in that very neon kind of look that the John Wick films have definitely, you know, been doing over the course of the last few years. And so with all that said, I think that this film definitely borrows a lot of the cool elements from the John Wick franchise, but I'll be honest in saying I don't think it necessarily lives up to those same level of technical achievements. I think there was something about the John Wick films with Chad Stahelski as the director that just works a lot better than this film does. In a lot of ways, this feels like a spin-off that is just a lesser version than what this franchise is already known for, which is not to say that this is a bad film at all, just to say that it doesn't feel on that same level when it comes down to those technical aspects. Now, Chad Stahelski does kind of step in here as a producer, but he isn't as involved in all the choreography and all that jazz the same way that he was with the John Wick films that he directed. But despite all that, I found myself having a lot of fun with the action in this film. I found myself really into a lot of these set pieces. I was really impressed with a lot of the choreography and a lot of the fun moments that got the audience to ooh and ah and applaud at certain moments. With all that said, though, I will say that this is a film that did let me down a little bit when it came down to its narrative. And that's a bit of a weird thing to say because the John Wick franchise isn't necessarily a franchise that I've gone to for top tier narratives. But I think what has been so expertly done with the John Wick franchise is the notion of having simplistic storytelling with a lead character that doesn't really say in abundance, but the world building has always been able to be expanded upon, whether it be with the way that the people react to John Wick, the exposition that's built around him, learning more about this assassin world that we're living in, the High Table, the Continental, all these different characters and all these different individuals. Each film in the John Wick franchise expanded this world and allowed us to see things in a new way and was able to tell a very simplistic story where the motivation was usually set up pretty quickly at the beginning of the film, whether it be the first film where John Wick's dog is killed and now he's going on this vengeful tale for the rest of the film. And of course, you get that added context of the fact that the dog was gifted to him by his late wife, or the fact that he's being, chased down by everybody and their mother in a future film. Those films usually have a pretty solid motivation at the beginning of the film that gets the film propelled and allows the action to just kind of be this, device that's getting us through all of these sequences. In the case of Ballerina, I do think it's a little slow to start because while I do think the film has motivation for our character, there is a vengeance story here similar to the John Wick films. It is a film that feels a little bit slower to start. So by the time you get to the actual inciting incident that makes our character go off and want to be on this vengeful tale, you're already 20-30 minutes into the film, and it just felt like it took a little bit to get there, and it didn't necessarily feel like it had as much flow as a film that really is just going for action after having an inciting incident within the first couple of minutes. That's not to say that this is a bad film or not something that you can root for the main character, but I ultimately found myself not as invested in the vengeance tale as time was going on, not in a way that necessarily made me dislike the film, but just in a way that made me feel like this felt like a little bit more like a generic action film that is now tied to a legendary action film of the modern day. The film is also showcasing a lot of big names in a lot of the marketing for this film, and you have people like Norman Reedus in here, who in a lot of ways plays a nothing character, who's a minimal small piece of the film that ultimately is just kind of serviceable, but isn't really necessarily a character that feels like he's even worth getting a character poster or being slap dab on the poster. Same with John Wick. While John Wick has some great moments, he's not in the film in abundance. It's really one key section of the film that he's a big part of it, and he does play pretty big key role. But again, he's being marketed as a huge part of this. And in a lot of ways, I feel like all these different side characters they were throwing into the mix sometimes took away from Ana de Armas's character as Eve. I felt like it took away from her journey a little bit more. And by the time the movie was over, while I found it to be a fun action film with a pretty generic, straightforward vengeance tale at the center of it that was personal, but also felt familiar in a way that we've seen so many times before, I ultimately found myself not as invested in the characters around because everybody felt very one note, very samey, down to the villain, down to the side characters, and even down to our main character Eve, who is likable, but I almost didn't think that the writing did in abundance for Ana de Armas to really rise to the occasion. I think that she did a great job with, especially with a lot of the stunts, at least the stunts that she did. There were a couple of moments where you could tell it wasn't her doing the stunts, which is okay, but it was a little bit noticeable at times. There's also a couple of moments that utilize CGI a little bit too much in some of these action sequences, specifically where a character would be holding something like a knife or a pair of ice skates, and you could totally tell it was a digital object in their hands. And so there was quite a few moments where you could tell that a person was not holding what they were using as a weapon, and it was a little bit noticeable. There was also a couple of moments where, I guess to make the action feel a little bit more fast-paced, you could tell they sped up the actors in those moments of action, a lot of times making a punch or a gunshot or a slice with a knife feel incredibly rapid in a way that just kind of was a little distracting visually. It happened more often than not for me to like at least have to mention it here. And when it really comes down to the central character, the ballerina, while I found her to be a cool enough character to get me through the film, I'd be lying if I said she was a really compelling character, and I think it's really highlighted when John Wick comes in. Once John Wick really falls into this movie and is at the center of it with the ballerina is where it really showcases that he is the star of this franchise and that she just kind of feels like a spin-off character. Again, it's not to say that Ana de Armas is bad in this film. It's not to say that the character of the ballerina, the Eve, is a bad character, but just that she wasn't really as compelling or as interesting as the other lead character in this franchise. And it just really, for me, showcased that like they needed the John Wick element to really kind of give this film that ooh feeling for its fans. So with all that said, I do think Ballerina is a fun time. I think if you're going into this just looking forward to a fun, straightforward action film with some of those big John Wick spectacle moments of action, I think you're definitely gonna have a good time with it. But I do think this is one of those films that in the future, when people binge the John Wick franchise, I don't necessarily know this is one people are going to be clamoring to throw on amidst it. I think plenty of people are going to enjoy this film. I think plenty of people are going to walk out of it having a good time. But if you're coming into this hoping for a fun, cool story, it's a little bit generic in one note. There's a lot of side characters and story beats that felt just underdeveloped. You know, the main character of the ballerina just feels underdeveloped in a lot of ways. Her motivation feels like it takes way too long to really kind of get to within the film as far as the real drive to get her where she's going. And it does really feel like a film that was relying on, hey, you like John Wick? Well, come into this movie and you'll get some cool John Wick moments. And when John Wick shows up, I feel like he just outshines the main star of the film, which isn't really him. And it just ultimately led to an ending that felt anticlimactic, generic, familiar, but was still filled with tons of cool, big, fun action spectacle that at least kept the runtime a lot of fun to watch. So that's my long, rambly review on Ballerina, or From the World of John Wick, Ballerina, whatever they're calling it. I want to hear what you guys have to say, so leave some comments down below. Are you planning on checking this film out? Have you already checked it out? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.